Good morning and welcome to another webinar sponsored by the Idaho Forest Restoration Partnership. I'm John Roberts. I'm a retired forester and a member of the IFRP. I'm also a member of the Boise Forest Coalition. I want to start out by giving credit and many thanks to Elizabeth Spalding and the Langdon Group for the marvelous work they do in putting these Zoom sessions together and directing us so we look good. And if you were tuned into the April webinar that was a two-day webinar to replace the on-site visit or the on-site meeting that we had planned in Coeur d'Alene, you know, they do a good job. And thanks for doing that. Today we're going to talk about community science, citizen science, some folks call it. And we have speakers today that are Dr. Rob Miller. So we're going to speak for an hour. We got 3 different speakers. We're going to speak for an hour, and then we're going to have a half an hour or some time anyway after the speakers to answer questions and to have some discussion perhaps. The first speaker is Dr. Rob Miller with the Intermountain Bird Observatory. He's a professor at BSU, and that's going to be a recorded presentation because this is his high season, his field season. He's out counting birds today, and so he was kind enough to find some time to record a presentation for us. And then we're going to have Randy Fox, who is part of the Boise Forest Coalition, a member and an employee of the ICL, Idaho Conservation League. He and John Reiling, the silviculturist on the Boise National Forest, will talk about the measurements that we've been doing on the project areas that the Boise Forest Coalition is working with. And then last but not least, Hannah Smay is an ICL employee that works in the Wood River Valley. And she is going to talk about the Wilderness Stewards program that ICL sponsors up there. Back to citizen science, collaboratives are finding that some of the projects that bring the interests to the table to collaborate cost a lot of money, and we find that monitoring is competing with those funds. The more monitoring we have to pay for, which is necessary for our decisions, the fewer projects we can do. So we're looking for economical ways to do the monitoring, and citizen science refers to non-scientists going out and taking the measurements and creating the information that we need to perfect the science of our forest restoration projects. And a good citizen science program also creates a great deal of ownership in the projects that we are helping with, and as well as a familiarity with the project area. There's nothing like knowing what you're talking about in the meeting room, nothing like walking around out on the ground and knowing the ground as well as or getting to know the ground almost as well as the foresters do. I hope you enjoy the next hour and learn some great things about non-scientists, monitoring scientific processes, and working with other great people. We will stay on the line, as I said, for a half an hour and answer any questions we can. And without further ado, we're going to go right into Dr. Miller's presentation on the Intermountain Bird Observatory. Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
Term I'll use throughout instead of citizen science. It's a term that we're increasingly trying to use. National Audubon has standardized on the term, etc. So I've run a couple community science programs for the Intermountain Bird Observatory, and I'll highlight some of my key aspects of success, as well as how it pertains to those 2 projects. Before we get started, I have a question for you. What is the difference between a community scientist and a professional biologist? I would say that the professional biologist has made more mistakes. Community scientists usually have less experience and they think they will make more mistakes, and that professional biologists don't make mistakes. And I can attest that it's absolutely false assumption that professional biologists have made lots of mistakes and they've had a longer opportunity to make those mistakes. So I use this as a way to encourage some of my newer community scientists, participants, that they shouldn't be afraid to get out there, get experience, and contribute to projects. So before we get started, I just want to, it's helpful to have a framework under which you define your community science programs. And this is a framework from Shirk et al., 2012. There are some other ones out. My experience with running community science programs is that most of them have been in this category. Most of them are contribution-based projects where we ask volunteer participants to collect and contribute data. But I've done community science projects up through full colleague type relationships with like the Idaho Master Naturalists that have a very deep experience in statistical analysis and may bring projects to me for consultation. But today I'm really going to be talking about two contribution-based projects where we have engaged participants to collect data on our behalf. Before I do that, I want to talk about some of my key tenets for success based on my years of working in this area. The first is that I always try to sell the vision of the project. So I don't go out and ask people to participate to something. I ask them to participate to a vision. The vision of conserving an animal or getting an assessment on the animal, etc. We try to make it about the volunteers, so it's not just about the data. It's the experience that they get in participating. It's the learning that they go through and the rewarding aspects of the contribution to the project. We try to engage our audiences continuously for multi-year projects. That involves pretty much every month of the year, and I'll highlight that when I get into Project Waffles. We try to invite contribution in many ways, and I'll give you an example of how some of our participants have brought projects back to us based on the fact of understanding our vision. We seek out partnerships. Some of my projects have hundreds of volunteers, and it would be extremely difficult to recruit those one at a time. So we tend to look for organizations that might have a charter or vision or mission that aligns with our project, and work with them through a partnership to recruit from their membership. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Many of our participants want to give even more, and I am often reluctant to ask them to give more because I know they're contributing so much already. But if it needs to be done, there's often very interested participants out there to contribute to it. And then one I don't like to do, but have found that for efficiency of projects, I've occasionally had to be selective on a particular skill set or a particular technology basis to contribute to the project. So I'm going to start by talking about the Western Oseoflammeus Landscape Survey. It's a survey of short-eared owls across 8 states that I operate. The black dots here are all of the survey locations. The blue is where we think most of the owls in the area exist. As you might understand, it's very difficult to recruit volunteers to cover all of these 440 different survey locations. But we've been successful in recruiting over 600 volunteers in 2019. It was a little less this year because of COVID. And that in that 1 year, that contribution was about $250,000 from the participants to the project, basically in their time using standard volunteer rates and their mileage using standard mileage rates. So these projects aren't cheap, they're very expensive. Our participants are paying most of that price. The foundation that I emphasize on all of my projects is we aren't just going out and doing things to do things or collecting data for data's sake. We're doing it to make a statistically rigorous and actionable analysis and results, often which result in publication or at least management reports to the entity. And our short-eared owl work is influencing multiple conservation plans across the region. It has been published, and I'm in the process of renewing that publication. So going back to those key tenets of success, for this project, selling the vision. It's about conserving this owl that we think is in rapid decline. It's about finding, is it truly declining? And if so, what are some of the causes causing it to decline? So that's what we emphasize throughout. Making it about the volunteers. You can see a couple of our very enthusiastic volunteers over here wearing short-eared owl shirts out surveying for short-eared owls. They have the opportunity to potentially see this, this species, but they're regardless of whether they do see it, they're going to be out at a time of day in a location they wouldn't normally go to, and most all of our volunteers report seeing very unique experiences while they're out there, seeing things that they don't normally see, etc. I engage the audience continuously. We do a year-round engagement on this project. We recruit in January and February. We survey in March and April. We give preliminary results in June and July. We have a webinar that we deliver our final results to all the participants in September. We have conferences later in October and November that we report back out on, and that leads right into recruitment again. I invite contribution in many ways. Because we sold the vision, I had a couple participants call me up and say, we think we found dozens of roadkill short-eared owls on this one stretch of road in eastern Idaho. And so I asked them in the future, if they see that again, could they get GPS coordinates for me? The next day, they went out, redrove that whole area, took 8 hours, stopped, photographed every owl carcass, gave me GPS coordinates, the works. They were very excited and interested in trying to address this issue. Seeking out partnerships. Couldn't recruit 605 volunteers by myself, so we partner with Audubon groups, with Idaho Master Naturalists and naturalist groups in other states, student chapters of the Wildlife Society. So we have 20 or 30 organizations that we recruit through that help us get those 605 volunteers. Don't be afraid to ask for help. I could have requested those participants go out and re-find those roadkill mortality owls. I didn't. All I had to do is suggest it, and they jumped on it. But they were very eager to do so. And then we have, in the first year, I tried to allow for paper forms to be mailed in and mailed back, and training materials. I printed it out and shipped it off to a bunch of people who didn't have smartphones. The routes got messed up because we didn't have GPS, et cetera. So we really put in the requirement that you have to have a smartphone with GPS capabilities to participate. And that excluded some people that I didn't feel great about. But the quality of the program and the efficiency of the program paid off numerous times by putting that low standard in there. So shifting now to another project was belted kingfisher surveys up in the Nez Perce Clearwater National Forest. The belted kingfisher is an indicator species for the Clearwater side of the forest, but we did implement this program across the entire forest. We recruited 45 volunteers, including Girl Scout groups, a high school student that did her senior project on the belted kingfisher, college students, birders, Forest Service employee families. And one of the really interesting ones about this project is a friend of the Clearwater advocacy group. Friends of the Clearwater wants to partner with the Forest Service, not always be in an adversarial relationship, and they saw this as an opportunity to contribute. So they offered to fill all of the routes not filled by other participants, which was very generous of them, and helped out a lot. The total for this project was about $13,000 in volunteer participants effort. Being a data person, I often think it's all about the data, but then I got these photos of the Girl Scout group that did 2 routes near Riggins, and I realized maybe it's not all about the data. This was fantastic and really my favorite highlight of these type of projects. But of course, we got quantifiable and statistically rigorous data that we could use in our Forest Service recommendations. So what did we do? We went back, we sold the vision. It's about Clearwater. It's about assessing water quality and how our natural species are dealing with it. That's what we're asking people to help out with. They get to go out and see this very neat species. We gave them training materials on the species, background information to pique their interest, etc. We didn't really engage the audience continuously because it was a one-year, one-off type of project. Had we continued, we would have done a similar process to Waffles. Invite contribution in many ways. Once again, wasn't as relevant for this project, but we did collect a bunch of reports of other places people have seen kingfisher data and really emphasize getting that into public databases so that it could be used. And seeking out the partnerships, the student chapters, the wildlife societies, how we picked up some of the students, and then the Friends of the Clearwater were our big partnerships in this area, the Audubon chapter up in North Idaho as well. So. In closing, I want to talk about a couple of the challenges that I still face with regards to community science engagement. First of all is that many people think that community science is a great way to go because it's free. Well, one, it's not free for organizing, it's not free for analyzing the data, and it's not free from the participant's perspective. They're investing a lot of time and effort. So I really don't like to use that word free. It is very expensive. We're distributing the costs across many interested individuals. Professional arrogance, people not trusting the results coming from community science projects, to sometimes I have professionals working on those projects that don't put their full effort in because they may think it's a lesser project. I've gotten some low quality data sheets from some professional biologists that have disappointed me. We struggle with how to do training on a large scale. Right now we're doing a lot of small, short, 5 to 7 minute videos on different aspects of the project to help people get properly trained. We have done some face-to-face trainings, but you can't reach all the participants, so you can't rely on that always. Sometimes we have projects where it just has to be done, or a minimum number of surveys. We usually have a 5 to 10% non-complete rate. So we try to overshoot that, but have some professional biologists that can go in and fill in if our participants don't follow through. And then, how to ask for that help when you really need it, without people thinking that you're overly dependent upon them, but you are engaging their interest and enthusiasm. So I'm not able to take any questions today on this because I'm not here live, but here's my email address. Don't forget the 7, Robert Miller 7 at boisestate.edu. I'd be happy to follow up with any questions that might come later. So thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for your patience with my technology hiccups. We are now going to move to another recorded video with regard to the citizen science program on the Boise National Forest. However, John Reiling, who you're about to see, he will in fact be available for questions. So feel free again to use the chat box and share your questions with us. And in one moment, I will pull up our next video.
Good morning.
I'm John Reiling, the Forest Silviculturist for the Boise National Forest and the Forest Service Citizen Science Project lead for work with the Boise Forest Coalition. I've been on the forest for 11 years, and this is the 10th year anniversary for collaboration with the BFC. I've led several integrated restoration projects where we were closely engaged with the BFC. We've learned a lot over those years, as I know other collaborative groups have, about how to effectively communicate and gain shared understanding and compromise regarding the planning process and desired outcomes. A couple of these projects highlighted a desire for multi-party monitoring and engaging the coalition after the planning phase and working with members during and after implementation. with a desire to treat larger landscapes, to incorporate shared stewardship and CFLR guidelines, and use principles of condition-based management, this need for post-planning collaborative engagement has been further emphasized. In 2018, the BFC received a $25,000 grant through the Forest Service's Citizen Science Competitive Funding Program. It was felt this would be a great kickstart to initiating the multi-party monitoring that had been discussed over the past few years. It was also felt that incorporating citizen science into monitoring would strengthen the BFC's credibility, increase awareness, potentially broaden public participation, and diversify their active membership, which I think by and large has occurred, at least to some degree. Our goal was to start relatively simple with straightforward procedures while having the capacity to grow and adapt through time. Like Rob mentioned, we didn't want to just collect data for data's sake. We wanted to be useful for informing management and developing collaborative recommendations for future projects, and be robust enough that it could be used to potentially develop peer-reviewed literature. The BFC also felt it was important to foster a learning environment for all ages and backgrounds. Our project plan and additional information is available on the BFC website, and additional tools for developing a citizen science project are available on the Forest Service's citizen science website shown here. Our citizen science proposal, which is in various phases of implementation, was designed to address a few key questions the BFC prioritized related to vegetation management, wildlife habitat, recreation and roads, hydrology, and fisheries. We're currently focused on 3 core projects: photo monitoring, large tree age transects, and a wetland restoration project that overlaps into multiple resource areas. The objective for the 360 photo monitoring points was to show different types of treatment that typically occur in different ecological conditions. This can be used as a communication tool to foster shared understanding of recommended treatments and provide a visual aid when future projects reference similar treatments in comparable conditions. In terms of the general process, photo point locations were predetermined and georeferenced. Volunteers navigate to plots using ArcGIS Collector and Survey 123, which is a free application that can be downloaded onto any smart device. We also have a couple tablets that are loaned out for data collection. The Survey 123 app has drop-downs to collect basic ecological, topographic, and management information, as well as basal area and a 360-degree photo. There's also a brief video tutorial that describes the process, and that's also available on the BFC's website. This is an example I recorded on my phone. It's a single image that, when viewed in 360 application, allows you to swipe around with your fingers or mouse, and you get a great visual of surface fuels, vegetation, tree canopy complexity, and you can even scroll down to see the tripod that the camera sits on. The objective for the large tree age transect is to document the amount and species of large trees before and after treatment, and how species respond to treatment, as well as to document the Forest Service's effectiveness at retaining legacy trees, and to show participants how to determine a tree age class without having to count rings. And thirdly, to collect additional information to improve legacy tree identification and conservation, particularly for more shade-tolerant species like grand fir. The general process for data collection involves surveying transects that were initially installed and sampled by U.S. Forest Service, and it was designed to sample across broad conditions across the High Valley Integrated Restoration Project area. All trees that are greater than 20-inch in diameter, we consider large trees that cross this belt transect, were painted and GPSed. Along these transects, citizens or community science members collect information on tree diameter, species, increment cores, vigor, and indicators of age, such as bark and branch and crown characteristics. This information is also collected in ArcGIS Survey 123, and it's a template that's available for download, and it just has pretty simple drop downs. There's, of course, some additional instruction that goes into this, and we usually accomplish that through a Train the Trainers course, bringing out some volunteers that then can lead volunteer efforts later. The third project is focused around the High Valley Beaver Pond Wetland Restoration Site. This aspect of the Citizen Science Project was designed to allow for large group events with various stations that incorporate some of the above monitoring protocols, but also include other variables of interest, all centrally located in one site. The various stations include road survey transects on unauthorized routes that have been proposed for decommissioning, as well as system roads proposed for realigning outside of riparian conservation areas. This information is also collected in a template that we've developed that's available in ARC Survey 123. In that template, volunteers document indicators of use of the road, sedimentation, road recovery, and adjacent stream bank characteristics. There's also a wildlife monitoring station where volunteers download photos from established game cameras and download sonar recording from equipment that's been set up to document things like bat activity. There's a fisheries station that goes through the process of eDNA sampling at various locations across the wetland site. And then there's a hydrology station that shuffles volunteers around the wetland to record information from various ground monitoring wells, which were installed to document meadow degradation, disrupted hydrology, and recovery. To aid with this project and gain a broader perspective of wetland recovery, fine-scale aerial imagery, visible and thermal, will be flown this year with a drone across the meadow. Unfortunately, due to concerns around COVID-19, we had to cancel our big volunteer days this year, but we did have an Idaho Conservation Corps youth crew at the site for the past couple of weeks, constructing a buck and pole fence as part of the ongoing restoration efforts. So with that background and overview, I'll pass it off to Randy Fox, who will outline keys to success we've gleaned through this project, as well as some challenges and lessons learned.
Randy, you're mute. Randy, I'm not sure if others are having a hard time hearing you, but I can't hear you right now. You might be mute on your phone as well.
Maybe you ought to go back to using the internet audio.
Yeah, I think you might need to use the internet audio if you want to just go down to the bottom of your screen and connect computer audio. He's given us money. In a moment, if we need to reconnect, I can always show our Boise Forest Coalition Citizen Science video, but I think he's going to come back in just a moment.
There you go. Can you hear me now?
You sound great now.
Oh, fantastic. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for your patience. I'm Randy Fox, and I'm a conservation associate with the Idaho Conservation League, and I'm a member of the Boise Forest Coalition Steering Committee. Part of my responsibilities with these two organizations is to help ensure the citizen science project that John Reiling just described succeeds. And today I'm going to tell you about the keys to citizen science success and lessons learned after nearly 2 years into the project. Some of these will be familiar to you as Rob Miller's tenets for community science success, and that should reinforce their importance. First, you might ask the question, why do we think that we need people, and why should people be interested in citizen science? First, it contributes to our knowledge and support for our public lands. And particularly, it supports the agencies that have increasingly limited capabilities and capacities. These projects that we're implementing on the Boise National Forest also gives the agency as well as the coalition members a better idea in the long period, in the long view, of how effective our restoration treatments are being. Are we, for example, are we removing too much or too little? Is the buck and pole fence that's been constructed around the wetlands area having a measurable effect on increasing groundwater in that area? And as well as helping with channelization. So those are part of the reasons that we feel that it's important to have them in. Our first key to success is having dedicated support from the sponsoring National Forest. Supervisory staff with the Boise National Forest have encouraged and supported John Reiling during the creation and implementation of this project, allowing him to draw on the knowledge and support of their GIS, hydrology, transportation, and wildlife management departments. There also needs to be dedicated support within the coalition to implement the community science project by learning data collection protocols to train others, organizing field trips, and troubleshooting collection and in-field situations, such as road closures or avoiding ongoing restoration efforts. We did run into some of these last fall when we were establishing some of our photo plot points and had to use adaptive management strategies to work our way around the project area to keep going while not interfering with ongoing cutting activities. This was also one of our earliest lessons learned within the coalition, and having members dedicated to ensuring the project's success helped move our data collection forward from where it had temporarily stalled. Projects without clear leadership and dedicated personnel will likely fall by the wayside through a lack of participation or through incomplete surveys and data collection. Our second key to success also echoes Rob's tenets. Clearly define the research question you want to ask and the answers you seek to learn. Having too broad a question or too narrow a focus area could hamper your project before you get rolling. For instance, the photo plot portion of our project originally contained 100 points. After a day's field work, working the bugs out of the system and seeing the actual topography involved, John quickly realized that 100 points was not a realistic goal to achieve in the time that we had allotted to us. And he reduced that to 50 points in the roughly 10,000 acre project area and we found that those were achievable and could still have a randomly selected representation of the vegetation structures within the project area. Our third key to success centers on garnering as much buy-in and internal support from the collaborative as possible. Coalition members must be willing to add multi-party monitoring as a priority to the coalition goals and follow through by recruiting potential project volunteers from the stakeholder ranks of supporters. Moreover, each stakeholder should be ready and willing to use their network to promote the project and provide public information, provide project information to the public. One way we have been able to do this is by recruiting interested participants from our individual volunteer roles, making an inquiry to the local master naturalist organization, and sharing videos like the ones created by the Boise National Forest for this project through social media. We're going to show you that video at the end of my presentation here. We recommend casting as wide a net as possible to recruit volunteers and use the collaborative stakeholders as a foundation for the project support and implementation. The final key to success is to use technology for data collection when it is appropriate. We're using Samsung tablets, as John mentioned, as the primary means of data collection for the large tree transects and the establishment of photo plot points. While there have been some technical difficulties figuring out the best way to integrate the specific apps and collection sheets, though through the dedicated work of John Reiling and Steve Kovac with the Boise National Forest and the field test subjects, including John Roberts and myself, we now have an easily operated system using established protocols to ensure consistent data collection with the integrated applications automatically populating data fields in some areas to reduce subjective input. Using appropriate technology and tools for data collection represents one of our most significant lessons learned. Steve worked wonders with the GIS and application integration so novices like myself could operate the system. And while the foresters attending this webinar might laugh, using a prism to calculate basal area is not the most intuitive process. Fortunately, both John Reiling and John Roberts are very patient and good instructors. So make sure to keep the tools and system simple and be prepared to troubleshoot your first few times out, or build this time into your project, and that will enable you to get a final process that works well for all the participants while achieving the stated goals and purpose. While a successful community or citizen science project certainly depends on several factors, we have found having dedicated personnel, a clearly defined question, coalition buy-in, and appropriate technology are four primary ingredients that are working to help us bring together a community science project that will provide useful information to the Forest Service and the Boise Forest Coalition regarding the effectiveness of implemented treatments. Additional lessons learned include keeping in mind that many of your volunteers will likely be retired and available only during the week when others have weekend opportunities to participate. Be prepared to adjust your field schedules to make best use of your dedicated volunteers. While this may close the door of opportunity for some participation, having consistent and reliable community scientists remains the key. Also make sure the field demands don't outweigh volunteer capabilities. For example, establishing photo plot points requires participants who would feel comfortable navigating in the woods off trail and through difficult terrain, which means the volunteers need to be in good physical condition. Finally, having your volunteers work in pairs in the event of an accident or mishap is always a good idea. We have not had any situations that brought this into play, but we recognize the potential dangers associated with working solo. One goal of this project is to provide the public with information regarding forest restoration and how individuals can work to support or become involved with the community science program. To this end, Joe Schindel, a Boise National Forest public relations specialist, produced a short video that provides a project overview that the Forest Service and collaborative members can use to recruit volunteers and inform the public about activities on their national forest. We're going to play this video next, and it will be followed by our last presentation on the Idaho Conservation League's Wilderness Stewards Program. And Hannah Smay will be giving us that presentation. Hannah is the Community Engagement Assistant for Central and Eastern Idaho with the Idaho Conservation League based in our Ketchum office. She helps connect ICL's members, supporters, and Idaho communities with ICL's conservation campaigns. And she manages the Central Idaho Wilderness Stewards Program, a volunteer program run in partnership with the U.S. Forest Service and the National Park Service to enhance and restore public lands in Central Idaho. Enjoy the video. And as a reminder, following Hannah's presentation, there will be a question and answer session. And you can submit those questions using the chat feature at the bottom of your Zoom window. And thank you very much for participating today.
Citizen science or community science is important because it helps land managers, in this case the Forest Service, build on science that can inform decision-making and implementation processes and connects our work to the public and people we serve. It also provides an opportunity for people to get involved with something they're interested in, whether it's wildlife, recreation, old trees, or land management. One data gap identified by the Boise Forest Coalition is a photo reference for different ecological conditions and what different management strategies look like on the ground. To address this data gap, a citizen science subgroup of the coalition, working with Forest Service specialists, developed a photo monitoring strategy to sample different vegetation conditions that are planned for different types of management, such as prescribed fire, regeneration timber harvesting, thinning, riparian conservation treatments, and management by different partners, such as Idaho Department of Lands through the Good Neighbor Authority, and purchaser marking versus traditional Forest Service timber marking. Photo plots, along with some basic forest measurement information, will be taken before treatment, after treatment, and in the long term at intervals deemed appropriate by the coalition. So we'll have 3+ photos of representative sites of the same area. Information from these representative sites can then be used to deconstruct complex ecological and management scenarios into products that can be absorbed by individuals with diverse ranges of experience. This critical piece of information would be used to develop a shared understanding and vision, helping to facilitate recommendations for future management actions. If interested in working with the Boise Forest Coalition on developing management recommendations for the Forest Service or engaging with citizen science, click the link in the video description or Google Boise Forest Coalition for monthly meeting locations and times.
All right, I believe we are ready to move to you, Hannah.
Great. Can you all hear me?
We can.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and start my slideshow. Thanks everyone for being here. As Randy said, I'm Hannah Smay. I'm ICL's Community Engagement Assistant here. I spelled that wrong, actually. I think I spelled engagement wrong on my slide. Good start. Here in the Ketchum office of ICL, and what I run the Wilderness Stewardship Program, which is a volunteer program meant to enhance and restore public lands in collaboration with the Sawtooth National Forest, the San Manchalis National Forest, and Craters of the Moon National Monument and Preserve. And so, just a little bit of background. Many of you probably know who ICL is, but for those who don't, we are a nonprofit organization that was founded back in the 70s to create a conservation community and find solutions that protect and restore clean air, clean water, and landscapes and wildlife in the state of Idaho. We have 4 main campaigns, and our Wilderness Stewardship Program falls under our Public Lands campaign, so we'll talk a little bit about that. But we also have campaigns dedicated to fighting climate change in Idaho, restoring the Snake River, and restoring populations of salmon and steelhead to Idaho. Like I said, ICL was founded way back in the 70s, which feels way back for me. But one of the biggest campaigns that we have ever embarked on as an organization is saving the Boulder White Clouds and designating the White Clouds as wilderness. And a lot of that was initiated because there was a threat of mining claims on Castle Peak. There was a proposed molybdenum mine at the base of Castle Peak that wilderness designation would prevent. And so there was a decades-long campaign to designate the White Clouds and the boulders as wilderness. And these are some good black and white historic photos from ICL's work over the decades to designate the White Clouds as wilderness. We are really happy that in 2015 we succeeded, we and many others succeeded in designating the Boulder White Clouds as wilderness. So you can see here's former President Obama signing the wilderness bill with ICL's executive director and our Representative Simpson in the back smiling. Really proud of all that work. Again, that took decades and decades. And that bill created 3 new wilderness areas in Central Idaho: the White Clouds Wilderness, which is now the Cecil G. Andrus White Clouds Wilderness, the Hemingway Boulders Wilderness, and the Jim McClure Jerry Peak Wilderness. And so all in all, that's over 200,000 acres of new designated wilderness in the Sawtooth National Forest and the Salmon Chalice National Forest. And so as we were celebrating this big victory and this successful decades-long campaign, we looked ahead and thought, well, we don't just want to say, great job, everyone, great. But instead, we wanted to make sure that these wilderness areas were managed well and were managed in a way that preserved the wilderness character of these landscapes. And so that is why the idea of the Wilderness Stewardship Program arrived, was acknowledging that there are limitations in the Sawtooth National Forest staff that, you know, would possibly inhibit them from managing the wilderness and to keep it wild. And so in 2016, after the Wilderness Bill was passed, we launched our Wilderness Stewardship Program, which provides wilderness stewardship through volunteer effort in the White Clouds, Hemingway Boulders, Sawtooth, and the Jerry Peak Wilderness area. Since then, we've actually expanded the area to include recommended wilderness areas on the Sawtooth National Forest and the Salmon Chalice National Forest. We have partnered with Craters Lagoon National Monument and Preserve. And really how we recruit our volunteers is, and here's a picture of our volunteers from last year. We weren't able to have a in-person training this year, but this is from last year. Really how we recruited our volunteers was drawing from the people who are already going out and hiking in the wilderness, who already love the White Clouds, who already love the Sawtooth, and want to add service and give back in their adventures that they're already having. And so that's really how we recruited, was we pulled from the people who helped us advocate for the wilderness designation and said, hey, I know you hike every weekend in the Sawtooth. What do you think about cleaning up trash and helping the Forest Service manage these landscapes as part of your hiking? And so that's have in-person training because of COVID, like I said, and so we are just using our returning stewards who don't need to have the full training. We had an online Zoom training to just kind of give some updates around COVID and around the food storage order that was just signed in the Sawtooth. But otherwise, we just had it online and they remembered their training from years past. Here is a map of all of the patrols that our stewards accomplished last year. We had 188 steward patrols across 5 wilderness areas and 2 recommended wilderness areas. And each patrol gets sort of input into this map. And so you can kind of see the breadth across all of Central Idaho that our wilderness stewards accomplished. And then I'm just going to go through some of the results from our stewardship program last year to give you a sense of what sorts of tasks and stewardship activities our stewards accomplish. You know, we have people who are like climbing peaks in the Sawtooth, and we have people bringing their kids and sort of instilling wilderness values and ethics into their families and their children. So we have a really big spread of different wilderness uses among our stewards. One of the most important things that we collect is hours. And so last year we had over 1,500 hours. And so this is really important data for the Forest Service, because having volunteer hours, you know, increases their grant abilities, and it's just a really crucial metric for them to in grants and other reporting. And so we again got over 1,500 hours last year of hours patrolled by our wilderness stewards, and so that's over 1,500 volunteer hours is another way to put that. One of the things that the stewards do is encounter and count other visitors and sort of keep track of what kinds of use is happening on the landscape. So are people day packing, or people backpacking or day hiking? How many people are out there with stock, with horses, with mules? How many people are mountain biking? How many people are, you know, using the motorized trails outside of the wilderness? So maybe they're, you know, going up to the wilderness boundary and coming back. And that gives us a really good sense of what types of use is happening, and sort of the trends of growth, and what places are being heavily used and what places might be more off the beaten path. And so that's been really important, how use has really grown in a big way in the Sawtooth especially, but throughout the whole SNRA. And so last year, the stewards counted over, you know, 3,000 humans, and that's pretty often that we get to see, you know, we have extra eyes, extra ears, and an extra voice for the Forest Service on the landscape. Cleaning up trash and, you know, naturalizing areas and keeping them more pristine is an important part of the wilderness stewards' tasks. And so we collect data on how many pounds of trash and litter the stewards clean up, from, you know, just things that fall out of people's pockets to abandoned tents to, you know, legacy trash from before the wilderness areas were even designated that are found and packed out. And so there's really a good spread, and it's always kind of fun to see what trash and treasures the stewards find. One of the other big things that the stewards do, which is part of our training, is destroying and naturalizing and clearing fire rings. There are lots of fire regulations in terms of elevation and lakeside fire regulations in the White Clouds and the Sawtooth wildernesses. And so the stewards, in order to reduce these structures that we consider as human structures, which goes against wilderness ethics and values, as well as to deter people from having fires, the stewards clean and reduce these fire rings. It's really fun to see like the before and after. So a lot of these is the before, and the stewards often submit pictures of this is what it looked like before, and then but totally you couldn't even tell it was a fire ring. One of the most important reasons that the stewards reduce fire rings is to, again, deter people from having fires, because if you come up onto a campsite and you're backpacking and you don't see a fire ring, you might not even consider having a fire. But if there's a fire ring already built for you, then it kind of plants the idea in your head. And one of the things that we really want to avoid is people cutting down trees, especially white bark pine in the high altitude areas of the wilderness areas, because those are endangered species and we want to protect them. And so that's one of the ways that these stewardship projects have these really important impacts on the resources that the wilderness areas are designated to protect. In addition to cleaning fire rings, our stewards also extinguish abandoned campfires. And so I'm going to play this video, and I hope that you can hear it okay. Our steward last year in the White Clouds coming upon a fire that was still hot.
Across the second fire of the day. It's still active. I don't even know what time it is, like 1. It's 1 o'clock, Washington Lake in the White Clouds. Second fire.
And so that was about this time last year. when they came across that fire. And so it was always every year, there's always a couple abandoned campfires that our stewards come across and extinguish, which is important work for lots of different reasons. The stewards also collect data on wildlife sightings. And so, you know, some of them are chipmunks, some of them are fish, some of them are mountain goats and bighorn sheep or wolverines even. And so they provide this information back to me through their steward reports, and then I pass that along to the Forest Service. We don't try to publicize where our stewards found a big herd of bighorn sheep, but we want to pass that along to the managers, land managers, so that they have a good sense. And so again, that's just an example of why having more trained and educated users out on the trails and in the wilderness areas provides good information back to the Forest Service. This is not a picture of human waste, but that is a big problem in the Sawtooth, especially as these bigger instances of human waste issues. And our stewards, they help clean up these human waste issues. They help report places where this issue is a big problem, and they can kind of help provide that information to the Forest Service. The Forest Service can create better infrastructure or signage around human waste issues. Here's just a big list of all the different things that the stewards collect. And again, the way that we report is that there's just a simple Google form that after each patrol, the stewards fill that out, tell me when, how long they were out, submit pictures, and then just select the number of all of these things. And at the end of the year, I have this big spreadsheet that I can create and collect all the data and help kind of furnish that back to the Forest Service. And that data then we can break it down into, you know, how much litter was in the Sawtooth versus Craters of the Moon, or how many human encounters. Last year, there were over 2,000 human encounters in the Sawtooth, which maybe indicates that the stewards spent more time in the Sawtooth, but the places that they went in the Sawtooth had lots and lots of people. And so that's just ways that we can break down the data and help provide useful information to the Forest Service and the National Park Service. Here's just some growth over time that I think is kind of fun to look at. So we started with 20 stewards. Last year we had 57. We have big increases of people encountered, and maybe that's because stewards are going out more, but also because there is higher visitation numbers seen in the Sawtooth and in the SNRA. You can see on the litter packed out entry here that last year, or in 2018, we had over 600 pounds of trash. And that's sort of a fun story I like to share because it's just kind of a I don't know, admiration in the data. And it's like, oh, 600 pounds of trash versus 45, that's a big discrepancy. And so what the stewards did is they had a reconnaissance trip to take out abandoned motorcycles that were in the White Clouds prior to the wilderness designation. And if they had been there for 50 years, they would have become historic trash and they would have been protected. And so on year 49, the stewards came in and packed out 600 pounds of motorcycles, abandoned motorcycles, in order to clean that area so it would not become historic trash. And so that's one example of what kinds of trips the stewards do. Usually the stewards are pretty much just going off on their own. They're going camping, they're going day hiking, they're going backpacking, and like including stewardship activities into their adventures they're already having. But occasionally we will collect a couple, we'll get together with stewards and do projects. We don't really do trail work projects like the Sawtooth Society or Idaho Trails Coalition, although we do some of that. We focus on things like signs. And so last year, the stewards hiked into a couple of the trailheads in the White Clouds Wilderness and installed new wilderness signs that reflect the new name of the wilderness, and then packed out the old signs. And then here's some other trips from years past in the White Clouds, especially, where our stewards cleared trails, created water bars, helped the Forest Service with projects on particular places that they needed help with. And then I wanted to just mention too that with these stewards, we're really giving them a really intimate glimpse into what it takes to manage a wilderness, and we give them, you know, they know the Forest Service staff pretty well because they have training with them, and then they correspond with them over email throughout the year. And so by really educating them around wilderness ethics and sort of the day-to-day boots on the ground, what it takes to be a land manager and participate in this, we really are able to build advocates. And so my job is to connect ICL members and community members to campaigns and connect them with decision makers and connect them with comment periods that are happening. And by cultivating and growing this wilderness stewardship program, we have a really amazing group of advocates that we can then tap and say, hey, there's a forest plan revision coming down the pipe, and so we need you to participate in these workshops and write letters to the editor. And we are able to sort of draw from them. Like right now, I'm having some of our stewards write some letters and blogs around the Salmon Challis National Forest, which is undergoing a forest plan revision. And so we are able to sort of really cultivate engagement with our stewards. And so, again, we weren't able to have training this year. A couple of the ways that we altered the program this year around COVID-19 was to really emphasize to the stewards that they don't have to talk to other people. They don't have to like encounter and talk to every visitor. They can, keep their distance. They can choose to just focus on destroying fire rings or just focus on, collecting data and counting rather than encountering. Occasionally our stewards will use resource-centered language to remind, other users to keep their dogs on a leash during the leash law in the Sawtooth, or one other regulation or the other. But we are like, oh, just stay safe this year. Don't feel pressure to talk to everybody, and maybe wear a mask. Another thing that we're encouraging them to do is to kind of stay off or choose trips that are off the beaten path rather than go to Iron Creek, and if there are too many people at a trailhead, maybe find somewhere else to go. And there's lots of places off the beaten path in the Sawtooth and in the White Clouds and the other wilderness areas there that could definitely use stewardship. And in the past, I think we've said, oh, you should go to Alice Lake every weekend and clean up fire rings because it's built every day. And this year we're kind of directing people to the less frequented areas. And so, again, here's some good pictures. Thank you all for listening, and I'm looking forward to answering your questions.
Great, thank you, Hannah. So I just want to quickly invite those who are panelists, so John, Randy, John Roberts, Hannah, stay with us, to go ahead and turn your cameras on. We do have a few questions. Hannah, let's stick with you. We did get a few questions specific to your presentation. The first one is from Ben Erie, and he asks, are your wilderness stewards collecting limits of acceptable change data?
I don't think so, because I don't know what that is.
Okay. So Ben, I would recommend, maybe reaching out to Hannah offline, and you can have a little bit of conversation around what you mean by limits of acceptable change data. Hannah, another question from you, from Daniel Haley. His statement is, much data is being collected. Is anyone developing data quality objectives so the decision makers are getting the data they need? Data for data's sake is of little value unless there's a clear goal for those data.
Yeah, so we sit down with the Forest Service every year after and ask them, what is most useful for you? What do you want us to collect? What is a better way for us to collect this? And then so every year we sort of refine the reporting structure and ask the Forest Service what is useful for them. And so we also write up, like at the end of the year, sort of a write-up of that data so that they don't have to wade through the raw, reported report spreadsheet that's just straight from what the stewards input. And so I know that ICL uses some of that data, and I think I don't know what all of the data the Forest Service uses, but we give them what they ask for, and every year we see if we should add other, things. And other part of the data is useful in the moment too. So, you know, the Forest Service has access to it. We send weekly reports every week to our stewards and to the Forest Service staff who are involved in the program and say, hey, there was, you know, this incident that happened, or, you know, somebody saw 25 bighorn sheep in this specific area, or somebody had a question around the wilderness regulation. And so the Forest Service staff and our stewards are sort of in contact every week. And if something comes up, usually the stewards will ask me, and then I'll refer that back to the Forest Service. And so there is some like useful data in the moment around, hey, maybe you should reinstall this sign or things like that. That's a good question.
Thank you. So just a reminder to everyone, if you have additional questions for any of our presenters, you can submit it through the chat. Another question we have with regard to, I think, probably either Hannah or Randy and John Reiling. The question is, how do you advertise your trainings? So how do we make people aware of this opportunity? And Hannah, maybe, or Randy, let's start. Yeah, Randy, if we start with you and then maybe move to Hannah with regard to her stewardship.
One of the things that we did with the community science project with the Boise National Forest is we reached out, used our community engagement team, and reached out to our volunteers that have signed up with ICL and contacted some of them and asked if they were interested. So that was one of our recruitment tools. The second one was getting a hold of Sarah Foch with the Idaho Fish and Game, and she runs the Master Naturalist programs here in the state. And she connected us with some of her volunteers, which were really fantastic. We also got some volunteers that were interested that came from the Forest Service, folks that had contacted either John Reiling or other individuals and asked about opportunities to work with the forest and to help with that. I know we had one young man last year that was interested in being a forester. He came out, volunteered with us, met John Roberts, ended up going to a Society of American Foresters meeting and found himself a job. So that's one of the ways that we've worked with that.
Great, thank you. Hannah, how do you advertise for your program?
So we mainly advertise through ICL channels. And so we'll put articles in our newsletter. We have a website page dedicated to the Stewards program. And in the past, we've done in-person like question and answers and like presentations around the Stewards program. I think we focused on the Wood River Valley and then Twin Falls and Idaho Falls as places to recruit stewards from. We also use the press, and so we'll pitch, you know, articles around, like we had some good press around our sign trip and like installing the Cecil B. Andrus Wilderness Steward signs. And we'll try and get that into the newspapers for either the events of the Q&As or for, hey, you know, like a little ad saying, apply to be a wilderness steward. We've also printed out flyers and hung them around town.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I can add to that a little bit as well, Elizabeth. You know, another thing that we haven't rolled out yet, but we did fund with some of the citizen science grant money was social media advertising. And we were going to use that for some of our big volunteer events this year, but you know, because we canceled those events, we've postponed some of that advertising, but that's another tool we're hoping to use.
Great. On that note, another question that we received with regard to, I think, just general funding. I'll send this first question to John and Randy, and then maybe Hannah, you can touch base. So with regard to costs of volunteers, what costs are covered and what are kind of taken on by those participants themselves?
Go ahead and take that, John, or?
Yeah, I can start. So at least for our project, I think all projects are a little bit different, but the use of the Forest Service grant, there are some sideboards and some stipulations for what we can and can't reimburse. But right now, the way we have it set up is volunteers can be reimbursed for purchasing needed materials and supplies. All of this has to be coordinated through the Boise Forest Coalition's Citizen Science Steering Group, as well as reimbursement for gas and travel expenses. So there is a opportunity to help provide some money back to volunteers, but by and large, a lot of it is dedication from them and their time. So they really have to be passionate about it for it to be successful.
I can talk about for the Stewards program. We provide materials like the training booklets, gloves, name tags, like shovels and maps to the stewards. And we haven't done that, I think, this year, but in the last couple of years we've done that. And so most of our stewards have those things from previous years, because all of our stewards this year are returning stewards. We don't reimburse for the gas and travel, but for our stewards training, that's free. And we provide lunch and food and snacks for that. For our trail trips, those are funded by grant money, actually, for grant funds. And so we'll provide meals, and I think we'll do some travel reimbursement for those like multi-day trail trips around installing signs. They're doing like a trail work project. We also provide pro deals. The Forest Service has some hookups for like ProLink, outdoor ProLink, and so our stewards get sort of some perks as being a Forest Service volunteer, and so they'll get discounts on outdoor gear, backpacking gear, clothing, and we provide, we have a couple subscriptions for GPS Spot that we'll provide, and so we have a couple like GPS units we can check in and out for our stewards for safety reasons. We provide Gaia GPS app for our stewards, and we also get we apply every year for a grant to send our stewards to wilderness first aid training, and so we'll have a couple open spots every year for our stewards to complete that course free of charge.
Great, thank you. Another question that just came in. Sometimes there can be technical barriers to sharing data between the Forest Service and non-agency partners. Are there any lessons learned about this aspect of multi-party monitoring? John, that might be a good one for you.
Yeah, that is definitely a constant struggle. Just with all of the constant changes with Forest Service security and encryption. But we found, at least so far, the use of ArcGIS Survey 1, 2, 3 and Collector, because it's so broadly used, there's a lot of support for it. And so if we run into an issue, it's usually not unique to us, and we've been able to find ways to figure out solutions based on other people's struggles, and the data is actually stored on an ArcGIS server that we can then transfer to the Forest Service systems, so that we can integrate it across the board, and it can be shared on a BFC website that doesn't have to go through the Forest Service. So really, that's, I think, our biggest lesson learned is it's best not to house it in an internal Forest Service database. It's best to have it in something that's publicly available. And there are a lot of tools on that Forest Service Citizen Science website that I referenced in my talk for different publicly available websites and servers that can house a lot of data.
Great. Other questions for our panelists? I do know we did have one question earlier with regard to establishing photo plot points. We were anticipating this question. So we do have a video. Do we have time, John? Is that video something that can fit into the next 9 minutes with regard to those photo plots, or should we just post it to the website?
John Roberts, you're talking to him, right?
Which
I was
John are you talking to?
Either one of you, actually. I was looking at John Riling,
Yeah.
but I think
Oh,
you'd like
okay,
to
yeah,
come-
sure. Yeah, we could play it.
Well, I think
Okay.
certainly anybody can sign off whenever they want to, but if it's interesting enough, they'll stick
Yeah.
around.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll
Well,
just
I
add
don't
it's
see. Go ahead.
that video is also just kind of an overview, just to show people the that some of the templates that are available. They're all publicly available. If you download ARC Survey 1, 2, 3 and Collector, anybody can access them if you search for them.
And I guess I would point out that this is the final act. We don't have anything after this video, so I think we've answered all the questions that are on the docket. So we'll just fade into the sunshine. This is the final act of our show.
Excellent. All right. Let me pull the video up in one moment.
To simplify data collection and help ensure consistency, we've developed templates using ArcGIS's ARC Collector and Survey 123 to streamline data collection. This information can be loaded onto any smart device, or we've also loaded it onto a couple tablets that are available for use. Once you've downloaded Collector and Survey 123 apps, you start by opening ARC Collector. It'll pop up different map options for the different surveys you have loaded. In this case, we're going to the photo monitoring. It populates your photo monitoring map, and it'll show you where you're currently located. We're currently in Boise, so we have to zoom up to our project area. If you can use this to navigate to your plot location real time. If you zoom into whatever plot you're navigating to and you select it, then you can see that this is a photo monitoring plot that's to be marked by Idaho Department of Lands. It's in our mixed 1 fire regime, and it's proposed to have a regeneration timber harvest. You click on that point, and then if you click add photo point data, that will automatically open Survey 123. Once you open Survey 123, it'll automatically populate the date and your strata information for your plot, where you're located, your plot number, and then you'll enter the surveyor name. Then you'll look at this figure to identify the slope position. Let's say that we're on a foot slope. Then you'll collect the basal area surrounding your plot. And then you'll add any comments, like if you had to move the plot location for safety hazard reasons, or if it landed on a road, or whatever that might be. Then you'll link your smart device to the 360-degree camera, shoot the picture, save it to the survey, and then click save. And it'll save it to your smart device, and you can upload it once you get internet connectivity. If interested in working with the Boise Forest Coalition on developing management recommendations for the Forest Service or engaging with citizen science, click the link in the video description or Google Boise Forest Coalition for monthly meeting locations and times.
All right. Well, with that, I think we are ready to conclude our program. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. This will be posted to the Idaho Forest Restoration Partnership website. So in the next couple of days, this will be available for viewing. So please do feel free to share with your friends if you found this of interest. Also, the IFRP members are always willing and able to follow up with questions or feedback that you have with regard to any of our programs that we discussed today. and we will continue to look for opportunities for additional webinar series. So feel free to reach out with any ideas for topics that you think would be interesting that we could help coordinate and bring to the larger membership. Anything from our panelists today before we sign off?
Thank you all for attending, and thank you for your patience.
Yeah,
Excellent.
thanks.
All right. Thanks, everyone.